Let's start with the big announcement from the Democrats that the presidential convention will be in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's an announcement that tells us a lot about what the Dems think it will take to win the White House. The DNC statement spelling it out. This signals that the party is doubling down on its winning strategy in this critical battleground state. And the Democratic Party is the party of the working people. Of course, Donald Trump won on the votes of white working class people. It's a long road to Milwaukee for those hoping to win the nomination in a crowded field that already has a dozen declared candidates. And one of the early leaders, according to the new Des Moines Register, CNN, Mediacom poll, isn't even in the race. Likely Democratic caucus goers in Iowa picked former Vice President Joe Biden, who has yet to declare as their top choice, with announced candidate Bernie Sanders a close second. But history could be working against Biden and Sanders, who will be 77 and 79 years old on Election Day. Every Democratic president in the past 60 years has been in their 40s or 50s, maybe giving hope to some of the younger contenders who are in the race or exploring a bid. The Democratic field also got a preview of just what some of the crucial early caucus goers want in that poll. An overwhelming 83% said they want a candidate who will harness positive energy in the party rather than anger at President Trump. 81% said they want the candidates to spend a lot of time talking about health care. 80% said the same about climate change, setting up core primary values. 67% of likely caucus goers said they want a candidate who fully backs new taxes for those with more than $50 million in assets. 65% said they want a candidate who backs the Green New Deal in full. 56% would be satisfied with a candidate who wants to make the U.S. more socialist. Trailing Medicare for All, which is backed by 49%, 44% legalizing marijuana on a federal level. Just 36% want a candidate who fully backs free college tuition. Joining me, Adrienne Elrod, former senior advisor to Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, Republican strategist Evan Siegfried, and NBC News senior politics editor Beth Phoui. So I want to put the candidate poll back up there if we can. It's interesting to me that in this Des Moines Register poll, the top two have a combined age of 153.
Well, if you put it that way.
Adrienne, does that tell us anything?
No, look, what it tells us is, first of all, these early state polls are largely based on high name ID recognition right now.
So this is a name recognition poll, essentially.
I think essentially, but look, these are also two well-known people, right? Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders have very high name ID, and they're also very well known by the caucus goers. And of course, Bernie Sanders narrowly lost Iowa to us in 2016 to Hillary Clinton's campaign. So it's no surprise that he's doing well. But what I found very interesting about this poll is the way caucus goers were talking about Joe Biden. They basically said, look, we want him to run. And we also don't think that his policies are too moderate or too liberal. We think they're perfect. That's a very good sign for Joe Biden. If I were him, still thinking about running, I'd look at this poll and say, you know what? I think I may jump in.
Yeah, I wonder, a good sign for Joe Biden, but maybe also a lesson for the other people who are in the race, one of whom is Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, right? He's down at the bottom of this poll. Having said that, a lot of people were impressed by what he did at South by Southwest this weekend, and we have a little bit more of one of the exchanges. Take a look.
Do you think Vice President Pence would be a better or worse president than President Trump?
His interpretation of Scripture is pretty different from mine to begin with. But even if you buy into that, how could he allow himself to become the cheerleader of the porn star presidency? Is it that he stopped believing in Scripture when he started believing in Donald Trump? I don't know.
Yeah, look at this poll. I mean, he's got 1%. He's down there with Inslee and Delaney and Castro and Bullock. But I wonder, am I living in the 20th century or do people still look for a presidential candidate they would want to have a beer with? And is that the guy we just saw there?
I think in the after President Trump's election, I think a lot of Democrats have really changed the paradigm there. They don't care who is going to, whether that person can have a beer with them or is somebody they want to be friends with. They want somebody to win. That's when I go out into these early states.
I agree.
That's the only thing I hear. Who can beat Trump? They are happy with any of these candidates.
Do you have to have that personality, Adrienne?
Well, I think it's important, and I think, what we saw last night with Pete Buttigieg, I always mess up his name, that was a moment. I mean, he had what we call a moment in politics. It's really hard to break through when you've got 15 or 20 people running in a Democratic primary, but he had a moment last night. I think you're going to see a lot more of that coming from him. He's a rising star in our party. Whether or not he does well, we'll see what happens in 2020, but he's got a bright future in front of him.
I will say this, the data from Google Trends, because we had two other Democratic candidates who were trying to break out, John Delaney and Tulsi Gabbard. The data from Google Trends showed very little searches on John Delaney, a little bit more on Tulsi Gabbard, and Pete Buttigieg went through the roof. He is somebody who could find himself on the main debate stage by the sheer force of will. He has a very interesting experience, and he recognizes, yes, I'm the only millennial in this race running, and I think that is actually a plus. He takes a very different attack to politics, and it's very relatable. It's somebody I would not sleep on. He might not get the nomination, but he's certainly valuable.
10 years younger than Beto O'Rourke, who a lot of people are looking at as this, sort of young guy who could come in.
I think back to your original point about Biden and Bernie being older. I mean, there's no doubt that the fact that they are the ages that they are going to be an issue. However, what I've seen so far out on the campaign trail, they're sort of different, the two of them. Bernie still has this incredible appeal among young people, young college students. They see him as carrying the message that they want from all of these candidates. Biden, on the other hand, very much feels like kind of a relic of the 20th century. I mean, there's going to be a ton of oppo that's going to be dropped on him of things that he said about busing in the 70s. He's a man of his time. He's a man of the prime of his career, which was at a very different moment for Democrats. Whereas Bernie Sanders has been consistent throughout his entire career. He doesn't seem to these young voters that he's old. They see him as somebody who's carrying the message that they believe in.
And yet he would totally shake up the race, and so would Beto O'Rourke, right? I mean, he's very buzzy. A lot of people have said he hasn't done the groundwork. He doesn't have in place what you should have in place by this point if you're going to run a serious national presidential campaign. He's definitely untested. You could argue he's a little quirky. People talking about his road trip, about the fact that he snuck into the screening of his documentary, and that he's kind of saying, well, I made my decision, but I'm not telling you, which is ticking a few people off. But if he does get in, how does it change the race?
Well, I think the field's already strong so far. So anybody who's
spoken like a true Democrat. But how does it change the race?
I think he changes the race in that he just adds another dimension in terms of somebody else for folks to support. I think he will be a top contender when he jumps in. I frankly think he should have jumped in right after the momentum of his Senate race when he raised record amounts of money in January, because I think he could have continued to ride that momentum. But, I think he changed the race. I think he puts Texas in play in the general election if he gets far. And I think that he's going to attract a lot of younger millennial types of voters. And he may split the Bernie Sanders vote there.
Urban voters. What did you find out?
Here's what I'm looking at in this race. We see that Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden are the top two. And to Beth's point, there's a generational divide between those. Younger voters are going toward Bernie Sanders, and older voters are going toward Joe Biden.
Precisely.
But when Beto O'Rourke gets in the race, if he does, which we all think he will, who hurts from that? Bernie Sanders. He siphons off votes, and Joe Biden sits smiling. Beto O'Rourke would be the best thing to happen to Joe Biden's candidacy when that is announced, because it drives the Bernie people nuts. And we've seen since December, Bernie Sanders' allies have been going after, in very big whisper campaigns and sometimes more pronounced campaigns, Beto O'Rourke. They've been saying, oh, he votes with Trump X percentage of the time. And they've been doing these little pot shots at him. And also, they've been saying he should be running for the Senate. And I actually agree he would be a better Senate candidate than he would be a presidential candidate. He's the second presidential candidate in this race third, who is spurned Chuck Schumer and said, I'm going to run for president instead of running for the Senate.
Well, he hasn't quite done that yet, but a lot of people think, well, Beth, we talk about this whenever it happens, when they make the announcement, here's where we're going to have our convention. Does Milwaukee help the Democrats, or is that just something we talk about?
Every time we see the selection of a convention site, it's like, oh, this state's suddenly in play, or this state that wasn't chosen is suddenly out of play. I am not a believer in any of that. quite frankly. There's no evidence that a convention is going to deliver a state. That said, it's a good symbolic message, as we well know.
Yep.
Democrats didn't play in Wisconsin. It is a state that has had it used to be a very Democratic state. Scott Walker and Republicans in the last decade have made it a very Republican state. With the Democratic governor this time only won by the slightest amount, and there's still a very strong Republican infrastructure. If Democrats are going to start making some more headway in that state, it's not a bad idea to go to Milwaukee.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.